Welcome, everyone. This is AudaCity, the Velocity OKC show. I'm Nate Fisher. I'm the Director of Communications here, coming to you live from the basement of the lovely Greater Oklahoma City Chamber. This is episode 26 of Season 1, and we're glad that you're joining us. We're also glad to have our President and CEO, Roy Williams, join us today here at the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber.
Thank you, Nate. Pleasure to be here.
And we're glad to have you on because earlier this year you announced your retirement. And so we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to hear a little bit about your life and career and a little bit about your background and also your thoughts on Oklahoma City and how it's changed and kind of what you're looking forward to seeing Oklahoma City do in the future.
Good. We should be able to wrap this up by tomorrow.
That's exactly right. But do kind of start at the beginning. I'm curious as to how anyone sort of gets into the economic development business. So give us a little bit about your background and how you came to this.
Well, I'm kind of a rare animal in this, and my explanation I think will bear that out. When I was actually a junior in college, at the ripe old age of 20 at Texas Lutheran University in Seguin, Texas, I was in our business club. And there was a speaker who came and spoke in, I think it was October of, that would have been back in 1970. And he was with the Texas Department of Commerce. And he talked to our group for a couple of hours. And I don't know, some kind of light came on that really intrigued me about community development, economic development, organization management. And so with his help, I actually interned my junior year at the Texas Department of Commerce. And my senior year, I interned at the Austin Chamber of Commerce. So 90 days after my 22nd birthday, I had done applications before I graduated. 1 week after graduation, I was the president and CEO of a Chamber of Commerce in West Texas. So that, sort of officially launched my career. And very few people in my position really aspire to this when they're in college. Mm-hmm. I mean, they tend to fall into it in some way, shape, or form. But I knew at the age of 20 that economic development, organization management, community building was something I wanted to do. And so if you track my career from that point on, everything falls into that line. Okay. That when I worked at Chambers, it was because they were lead economic development organizations. Mm-hmm. And I also ran state agencies, I ran regional economic development programs, but everything was geared around economic development as being the core mission of the organization I worked for or that I ran.
What is it about economic development that attracted you to sort of that function, and maybe give the audience a little bit of a primer on what is economic development? What are primary jobs? What are we trying to do when we're talking economic development?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people kind of use the words community development, economic development as being the same thing, and they're very, very different. If you look at a community and your objective is total community development, you really have to understand what are the components of that. And there's a physical component, there's a natural component, there's an economic component, and there's a social component. Well, those three components, the physical, the social, and the natural environment, you can't impact those without having resources. And that comes from the economic environment. Mm-hmm. And the economic environment is impacted basically by jobs. The confusion, though, is a job's a job. It's really not. There are really sort of two different kinds of jobs. One is what we call primary jobs. One is what we call secondary jobs. Primary jobs create wealth. Secondary jobs circulate wealth. So if you don't have a focus on primary jobs, you don't create wealth. And so understanding that and understanding what does it take to get primary jobs in your community, because essentially all primary jobs are jobs that add value to goods or services and export those services outside of your market. Secondary jobs just circulate within the market. So it becomes necessary if you want to build total community development, you have to create the economic environment that provides the resources to develop those other three components. Mm-hmm. So that became my passion. That if I want to make this community better, I've got to make sure there's a focus on economic development. But then I also know that the other components of total community development don't just happen because you have a good economy. That doesn't mean you have a great community. It could have many, many other issues that you need to face. But that being job one, make sure you have an active initiative of primary job creation that gives you resources you can go worry about the social, political, and natural environments, and make them as good as they can be within a community.
Right. You mentioned that you started out in Texas, kind of the Austin area, West Texas. I know you had economic development positions in Arizona and Ohio and Columbus as well. Right. And then you eventually came to Oklahoma to join the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. Right. And then the Chamber eventually after that. And so I was just curious as to what sort of attracted you to Oklahoma and in general, and sort of Oklahoma City specifically at that point in your career?
Well, and back to you sort of tracking me, it is interesting that the first job I got is the only job I've ever applied for. And I applied for a bunch of them because when I got out of school, I needed to make a living. So when I took that first job, I was really only in that job for 9 months, and I got recruited to Central Texas. Okay. And my goal in life at that time was to go to work for the Texas Department of Commerce. That was my long-term goal as a 22-year-old. And I couldn't go to work for them until I had 3 years of experience. That was their requirement. So 9 months in West Texas, and after 2 years and 3 months in Central Texas, I called the person that I knew there and said, "Hey, I got 3 years of experience. Do you have any openings?" And he said, "We don't at the Department of Commerce, but the governor's office in Texas wants to do a statewide business retention initiative," because at that time Texas was kind of in a recession. And he said, "If you're interested, you would be one of 3 people we hire to implement this program statewide." So we talked, and I finally agreed to do it. And so the 3 of us, one of us had East Texas, which was me, one had West Texas, one had South Texas, and our goal from the governor's office was to identify 4,000 new jobs that companies in Texas would pledge to create. Less than a year into this, we had done over 40,000 jobs.
Oh, wow.
10 times more than what the goal was. And so it was like, do we really need to keep doing this for another year? And they said, no, but how about you come over to the Department of Commerce and be a domestic business recruiter, which is really what I wanted to do. I wanted to recruit domestic. So I did that. And I did that a couple years, and then I had an offer to move to East Texas to start up and run a regional economic development program, which I did. And then a number of years later, Governor Henry Bellman, the governor of Oklahoma, called me in 1988 and said, "Would you consider coming to Oklahoma to run the Department of Commerce?" And I said, "I don't know, never thought about it. Don't know anything about Oklahoma." But one thing led to another, and I came. And then Governor Bellman did not run for re-election, and he was a Republican, and David Walters got elected, and David was a Democrat. But David said, "Hey, I like what you're doing. I want you to stay. I want you to keep running commerce, if you will." And I said, "Sure." So that lasted until about 1992, and then a headhunter called me and said that the Greater Phoenix Economic Council is looking for a chief operating officer. And the Greater Phoenix Economic Council is one of the oldest regional economic development organizations in the country. And I took that job and ran that for a number of years. And then a good close friend of mine that I'd known since college days, he and I started a company called EDGE, Economic Development Generating Excellence. And we did consulting work. And we ended up over about a 3-year period working for about 200 different clients in about 25 states. We worked for cities, counties, universities, state agencies, private developers. We also did headhunting for economic development organizations. And we also did corporate site location consulting work for Fortune 500 companies. So we worked all over the United States, Canada. I even did some contract work with the State Department in Baku, Azerbaijan.
Wow.
And then while I was at the Oklahoma Department of Commerce, started about 15 different international offices across the world. Mm-hmm. So got a lot of experience in that. But that consulting business was based out of Phoenix, and most of our work was on the western part of the U.S., and we were trying to break into the East. So I decided I would open an office in Columbus, Ohio. So I went there, and one of my clients ended up being the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. And I helped them build a strategy for a regional economic development program. And my business partner called me one day and said he was taking the job as Secretary of Commerce in Nevada. And I thought, well, I don't want to run this company by myself. Columbus has offered me a position. I'll just take that. So I did.
Okay.
And was in Columbus until 2002 when the headhunter here called me and said they're looking for an executive vice president of economic development. And I said, well, that's interesting because I have no interest in that. That I was in Oklahoma in 88 to 92, mm-hmm. and Oklahoma was in a depression, and Oklahoma City was a nightmare. There was nothing going on. Everything was dead. In the 4 years I lived in Oklahoma, I think I went downtown maybe 3 times. Uh-huh. And that was to see a friend who was at the Chamber of Commerce, because there really wasn't anything else to do in Oklahoma City, downtown. So I said, no, I'm not interested. And so about 2 weeks later, they called me back and said, we rethink this. And I said, no.
Still no.
It hadn't changed.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, Oklahoma City hadn't changed. And they kept bothering me. And finally, they just said, look, we won't pressure you. Just come down here on your leisure. We'll pay for it and look around and stuff like that. So eventually I caved. And I came in and, what I saw, because maps had been passed, about 8 years prior to that. So there were a couple things happening. Mm-hmm. Bricktown had the canal in it, the ballpark. The arena was under construction. The downtown library had not yet been built. Mm-hmm. But the selection committee were 5 really great community leaders. And they shared with me their vision for Oklahoma City and what they wanted to do here and what their commitment in doing that was. And to me, that's always the thing that you pay attention to. Are people bought into it? Are they willing to put skin in the game? And are they committed to it? And they assured me that they were. And they also said, if you take this position, there's a good chance, if you're successful at it, that within about a year and a half, you would succeed to the presidency, mm-hmm. which that all happened. But I also remember that they kept asking me one key question, and that was, so what would you do if we were to hire you to do this? And I said, it's simple. I said, I would quit marketing this organization as the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, and it would become the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, and we would stop focusing on a city and start focusing on a region. And we would build that region, and we would bring in all the regional partners, and we would have a much better story to tell, mm-hmm. and a much higher likely of success of achieving what all you guys want to do. And they said, okay, when do you want to start? So that's what it led to. And I think it was in August, actually, this month of 2002 that I started here.
Wow, okay.
And the rest is history.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, I'm glad that you brought this up, is this concept of regional economic development. So you were credited with, obviously, bringing this sort of strategy to Oklahoma City. So tell us a little bit about that in general, and why is that approach important?
Well, I learned throughout my career as I worked with corporate real estate people, corporate site location people, and then me becoming a corporate site location consultant and working directly with companies. And when you dissect, how does a corporate site location system process work? Well, it's not a site selection process. It's a site elimination process. And ironically, companies end up with the least worst site. Uh-huh. We call it the best site.
Right.
But what they do when they cast their net to look at regions. They're looking for labor supply. They're looking for suppliers that they need to be successful in the work that they're in, and they're looking potentially for customers. So no one city is going to have all of those attributes. It's going to be a region. All of us know that when we go to work in the morning or afternoon, we don't stop at the city limits and say, I'm not going to cross that line. When we go shopping, we don't say, I'm not going to cross that line. Mm-hmm. And so you have to understand that's how companies think. We may have people who will drive 30 miles to work for us, mm-hmm. not just in your city. Right. And so when you're selling your product to a company, you should sell knowing that they're looking at a much larger footprint than just your city. And, you know, it's really difficult sometimes to get elected officials, especially, to think outside the box and to think we can only put our resources inside of our city limits and not think about catching bigger fish and participating in a regional effort. So, you know, I quickly learned that if you're going to be successful in economic development, you have to think regionally. Mm-hmm. The other thing is when companies express an interest in an area, they don't want to talk to 30 different economic development people. They want to talk to one. And until they understand the geography and maybe decide, well, we do like this region or this area a little bit better, that's when a local economic developer can get engaged and start talking about their community. But up until that time, they only want to deal with one person to talk about the whole region. And we're the entity that needs to be that, so they don't have to wonder, well, who do I call in this town and who do I call in this town? And who? Because you can't always call the chamber, because the chamber is not always an economic development organization. You can't always call the city, because the city may not be the economic development organization. So to someone in New York, how do they navigate that?
Right.
You know, and it shouldn't be their problem.
Right.
So, you know, you have to really think regionally, plus how do you bring all those resources? How do you categorize those resources? And how do you, you know, make them really state a much bigger case than just your city? Mm-hmm. That's what Oklahoma City was doing mm-hmm. Up until we created the regional partnership.
Right. So this is a much more, you would say, customer-focused approach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was a site location consultant, there were certain areas of the country that I would tell my clients, you don't want to go there. Even though they said, well, I like that area. I said, yeah, but you don't want to go there. You'll never figure it out.
Right. So, Roy, we've had, under your tenure, Oklahoma City has seen a number of big announcements and really exciting things happening. I'm just looking at the list here. The GM plant turning into the TAC, the Hornets and the Thunder, the BNSF rail yard. You've presided over 2 different MAPS elections, the Big League City campaign, criminal justice reform, the Innovation District study and getting that going, the new convention center and the Omni Hotel, Boathouse District development, the Oklahoma Bioscience Association. What do you think are the, maybe top 3 announcements, or what are the most important things that from your perspective that you've seen happen over your 20 years here?
Well, it's really hard to say, oh, I'm most proud of that one, mm-hmm. Because all of them kind of are dependent upon the environment, existing conditions, needs, and really fulfilling longer-term goals and objectives. The first project that I worked on when I was the EVP of Economic Development was Dell. And most people probably don't even know Dell is here, but the only reason we got Dell here was because of the river. That was in MAPS 1. Had we not passed MAPS 1, we wouldn't have had that waterway there, mm-hmm. and that's what excited Dell about coming here. And so that was a big accomplishment, the first major company on the river that we have. And Dell is such a internationally known brand. So getting them here was very significant. Another really big impact here was Boeing. We recruited them out of Long Beach. At that time, it was a 550 employee operation. Boeing now has 3,600 and growing. That was a really milestone. The other, I think, really big milestone was both the Hornets and the Thunder. And again, had we not had maps and had an arena, we wouldn't have been able to host the Hornets after Hurricane Katrina. Had we not been able to host them, we wouldn't have been able to show the NBA that a mid-market city could support an NBA team. And then, of course, passing the big league city sales tax to bring the arena up to NBA standards and build the practice facility enabled us to get an NBA franchise, which there's only 30 of those in the world.
Right.
And only 29 cities have NBA franchises. And I think the Thunder brand probably, if you wanted to point out one thing other than maps that has done more for Oklahoma City, is that. You know, there's never been a negative about that brand, and it's global, more so than any other professional sport. And so I think it has raised the visibility of Oklahoma City beyond what anything else could do. And for people who weren't around at that time, they just don't really understand about the lack of image and notoriety that Oklahoma City had prior to that time, and how that brand has really elevated, you know, not just people from outside of here's knowledge of it, but also how it excited the community about, my gosh, you know, we're in the NBA playoffs. The world is watching Oklahoma City. And that's something that maybe, if you're lucky, once in your life, something like that happens. And I was fortunate enough that I was at the table when we were negotiating the Hornets, and I was at the table when we were negotiating bringing the Thunder here. And not many people in their lifetime get a chance to do something like that.
Yes, that's very cool. Well, and you're right. It does put us in sort of a different league of city, certainly than we were previously.
Right.
And yeah, what you mentioned about giving something that community can really coalesce and rally around, something that we hadn't necessarily had before, and really generate a lot more community spirit and pride in Oklahoma City. That's something that I noticed from the Thunder.
And one thing I noticed too was, you know, prior to that, you were either a fan of OU or OSU. That's how the city broke it down. But what people didn't realize is, as Oklahoma City was changing and as Oklahoma City was growing, most of the people coming here didn't go to OU or OSU, and they had no affinity or affiliation with those two schools. So the Thunder automatically became their go-to, you know, team in sport. So it wasn't at the expense of those universities. It was that we became a different city.
So how about something that's perhaps been a little bit under the radar that hasn't necessarily captured the public's attention, that has actually played a really large role in the city's success?
Well, I think there's stuff that's evolving, and probably is not a whole lot on the radar screen. One is the Innovation District. You know, the basic infrastructure is now coming into play. A lot of the kinds of services, the kinds of talent, the kinds of connections are all being made. And these kind of things, you know, are like a lot of things that until it gels, you don't really see all the benefit. And you don't, but once the sparks start flying, you began to see this whole change about developing ideas, having the resources to turn those into commercial opportunities, creating new businesses, on and on and on. That's one. The other thing that really excites me is the potential of the film industry here. You know, we've got a big shoot going on here right now with Paramount. But I think that's just an indication of much more to come, because the experience that Paramount is having here is unbelievable. I mean, they have said they've never been anywhere like this. How engaging people are here, how welcoming people are, how willing they are to help, suppliers that they have here. They have 500 employees here, and they're living in downtown apartments, and they're living in hotels downtown. Some have bought houses. And you don't move from California to Oklahoma City and buy a house unless you think you're going to probably live here, which means they're thinking these jobs are going to be permanent. And too many people, I think of the film industry as, oh, you recruit somebody to come to town and shoot a film and then they go home. That's not an industry. That's a project. And what we want is an industry. And that is you get the infrastructure, you get the talent, you get the workforce. And so more and more production companies come, and eventually it becomes a home of the production company. And I think we're on the cusp of that. I think that's going to be something that's going to be really, really exciting. You know, to have the Tulsa King filmed in Oklahoma City says something about Oklahoma City.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. And you're right. And I'm glad you mentioned the Innovation District as well, because we've got a great story about the convergence development and maps for the Innovation Hall and how all that's coming together. So that's going to be on velocityokc.com. So we'll make sure and have a link to that story in the show notes and the newsletter where you can get that. That's great. And I know that we should have an announcement coming on some more film-related things here in the near future as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, you're right. That's a very, very cool development, and workforce is such an important part of that. And now that you have a good set of crew that's trained and they know what they're doing and they have experience, it's important to keep things moving so that we can keep that workforce working and continue to work for us.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really exciting because there's a lot of players, and career techs have gotten very involved in training and certification of people who immediately get employed. So it's really exciting that there's more diversity of what kinds of things you can do in Oklahoma City.
Right.
And, you know, in kind of stepping back a little bit too, you know, over the course of the last couple of decades, the economic diversification has just been phenomenal. You know, oil and gas has historically been the 800-pound gorilla. But their employment in the metro now is about 15,000. If you look at aviation and aerospace, it's about 44,000. Bioscience is about 42,000. So in terms of employment, we have other sectors that are much, much larger than energy. Of course, there's still a huge economic impact. But people have always thought of Oklahoma City as oil and gas town. Well, we are. But there's a whole lot of other stuff here, too, besides that.
That's right. Well, I can speak from my own experience. I've been here for about 14 years, and that's economic diversification has been a big part of what we do.
It really has, and, you know, and that in turn has just driven all other kinds of services and retail demand, services demand. And so it's just been phenomenal that it's also touched all areas of the region. You know, there's not just one or two cities in the region. There's not just east, north, south, west that's going. You see development everywhere.
That's right. So we've talked a lot about your background and how you kind of got into this business and how Oklahoma City has changed so much in the positive direction during your time here. So thinking about all that and looking toward the future, what excites you most about what's coming down the pipe for Oklahoma City?
I think MAPS 4 to a great deal because MAPS 4 is very different than MAPS 1, 2, and 3. They were all focused pretty much on specific construction, infrastructure, facilities. MAPS 4 addresses some of that, but most of it addresses other community needs, other social needs, criminal justice needs, homelessness, stuff that has now moved us sort of to a new place. Yeah, we built a bunch of great amenities. It's really driven our city in a great direction. But let's not ignore some of the other social issues that need to be taken care of, and that MAPS perhaps can be a tool to do that. So, you know, we're so involved in criminal justice, and we see all the different things that cause criminal justice to be there. And it's really good to see the voters say we're willing to put up money to try to address some of these really hard issues. It's easy to go out and build a building. It's really hard to address homelessness. It's really hard to address mental health and alcohol and drug abuse and diversion and all that. But we're doing that.
Right.
We're putting money into these things to try to take care of people in our community that we've neglected in the past. And I think that's a real positive sign in the growth and development of the city.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It makes good sense on multiple levels, just on a human level, but as we've seen, it also makes really good economic sense to address some of those things.
Yeah, and if it weren't for the MAPS process, we probably wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
Because no other cities are addressing this multitude of issues in a manner that we're addressing them. And so, they're piecemealing it. They're trying to figure each one out individually. Well, we put them all in a big box, and, we're going to go after all of them at once.
Right.
And really try to tackle some hard stuff. So I think it's going to really change the psyche of the community, and it's going to really help improve, the attitudes of people within the community and the health of the community as a whole.
All right, so a number of successes. Oklahoma City is certainly in a much different and better place than it was 20 years ago, as we're all aware. Kind of as a final wrap-up question, why do you think that it has worked in Oklahoma City? Like, what has made all this sort of come together and happen the way that it has?
There are several takes on that. One is something that we hear from cities who come here on inner-city visits. And they constantly say they have never seen community leaders always talking on the same page, always saying the exact same thing. It's as though they've been scripted by the chamber, and they haven't been. The reality is they are all engaged, they're all involved, they're all committed. So they know what they're talking about. They're not, guessing as to why. And this goes back to when we were talking about when I first came here and what attracted me here. And it was the leadership, that the leadership had made a commitment that this is what it was all about, that they're all in and they were going to be there, for the long haul. And that is Oklahoma City's secret sauce. It is that the public sector, by that I mean the city, the county, the school district, legislative leaders, and the business community don't do anything as renegades. We do them together. The Chamber's relationship with the local governmental entities just couldn't be tighter because we rely on each other so much. The fact that we run those campaigns and bond issues, they have to be friends of the business community. And we want to be friends with them because they provide critical services that all of us want and need. That doesn't happen in every city. That doesn't happen in a lot of places. In a lot of places, they're enemies, not friends. But here, the relationship and the confidence and the trust is really unparalleled to other places. And, a lot of cities leave here shaking their heads saying, well, we're never going to do this in our town. It isn't going to happen because we don't have that culture. And what I tell people, too, is, we've done some really great things. But we can't ever say, well, let's enjoy them for a while. And let's move off the road and rest and sit back and enjoy this. And my response to them is, well, there'll be someone passing you real soon when you're sitting on the side of the road. And so, this isn't even a marathon. It is a never-ending race. And you can't ever sit back and pat yourself on the back of how great of a job you did, so, let's smell the roses.
Right.
You can't do that. There's too many competitors out there who want what you have or what you want as well. And so the point of it is that all of this stuff is very fragile. The relationships can break down overnight. Mistrust can occur when you're not transparent and honest. And so it's all about truly committing to something, for the long haul. And in a lot of places you can't do that because that trust has been broken and you can't remend it. And we've just been fortunate that, we've gone 30 years now where the voters have trusted the city to deliver. We've been able to permeate the school district and the county for doing the same thing. And that just means something that doesn't happen in so many places. And it's just critical that people are mindful of that they don't take it for granted. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is how it's always worked. That's just how it's going to work tomorrow. Well, it won't unless you really commit to it and continually bringing more people into that picture and getting them to really understand. It's easy to forget history really quick. Yeah. But to really understand, why is Oklahoma City doing what it's doing? Why are we getting ahead? And it's because of that. And the minute we quit that, the minute that it all change.
All right. Got to continue to actively work to continue to create that spirit of partnership and collaboration.
Absolutely.
And move movement forward.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, very good. Well, Roy, I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank you for your leadership and for all your work and everything that you've done for Oklahoma City, and as well as the time here today. We really appreciate hearing a little bit about your story and your journey and your perspective on things. So really appreciate it, and thank you very much.
You bet. It's tough to put a 50-year time frame into 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But we did it.
We did it. That's great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Well, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Roy Williams, our president and CEO, again for the time today and the interview. That was very informative for me and hopefully for all of you as well. Longtime listeners and viewers of the podcast have probably noticed that things have changed a little bit with our setup. Kaylee has moved on from the chamber. I'm actually also in my last week or so here at the chamber, so I'm going to be moving on as well. I wanted to thank all of our viewers and listeners for viewing and listening and for all your feedback and for staying with us. This has been a really fun project for us, the AudaCity OKC podcast. I wanted to also encourage everyone, though, to stay with us. There is going to be a season 2. It's going to look a little bit different, but I have high hopes. We've been talking internally on some different things that we can do and some really good content we can provide for you all. It's still going to be the same idea, the Oklahoma City that you need to know about to be a really informed and really well-connected citizen and part of Oklahoma City. So that part's not going to change. The delivery may be a little bit different, but it's still going to be good content, really good, interesting things about what's going on in Oklahoma City and some of the things that you should know about. So stay tuned with us for season 2. It's going to be great. I have very high levels of confidence in everyone that's here at the chamber that's going to continue to move this forward. And again, just wanted to thank everyone on behalf of myself and on behalf of Kaylee. I know she wants to pass along those same thanks to everyone else as well. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Now, if you have feedback for us, the best way to get that to us is just an old-fashioned email, and that email address is networking@okcchamber.com, networking@okcchamber.com. If you prefer the social media route, our social media handles are generally OKC Chamber, so you can get at us there. So thanks again, everyone, and we will see you down the line.